How does it work? And how do we master each level? How do we know when we've mastered each level? Is it like a video game? Do we beat one level and then move to the next level? Well, not exactly. This is the mountain of English fluency. On some days, the journey to the summit or the top of this mountain can feel like the most exciting thing in the world. And on other days, it can feel like the most embarrassing, heartbreaking waste of time. Maybe you've been learning English for years, but you still find yourself becoming frustrated when you need to go look up a grammar point, a basic grammar point that you can't remember. Or maybe you understand me perfectly, but you still feel lost sometimes when you try to watch a series in English without subtitles. Okay, but like, why are they talking so fast? You may be asking yourself questions like, so when will I be fluent in English? What are the steps? What program should I be following? How do I untangle this mess of English learning? Please grab your drink of choice, get comfortable, and let's get down to business. Today I'll talk about 3 points. 1, 2, 3. Beginning with number 1, your childhood and learning your first language. Do you remember how you learned your first language? I definitely do not remember how I learned English, but it's very important for today's video, so I'm going to remind myself right now. There is some fascinating research from the 1960s and the 1970s that suggests that babies and toddlers all learn English in the same order. So according to this research, children all follow the same sequence to learn the grammatical morphemes of English, which is just a fancy term for smaller parts of words such as ing or s that get added on to other words to change their meaning. And that order looks like this. So babies tend to master the items at the top of the list before they master the items at the bottom of the list. All of this research is summarized in a great book called How Languages Are Learned by Patsy, Lightbown, and Nina Spada. Spada? But even more interestingly, it does not stop at grammatical morphemes. Children also do this with negative forms and with questions. All children follow the same 4 stages of learning negative forms. For example, in stage 1, a child might say something like, "No cookie," "No brush hair." In stage 2, sentences may get a little bit longer and may include don't. So for example, "Mommy, no brush hair. Don't touch that." In stage 3, the negative element is placed into a more complex sentence. For example, they may say, "I can't do it," or "He don't want it." In stage 4, children start to use the correct form of the auxiliary verb, such as do and be. For example, "You didn't have lunch," or "She doesn't like it." It's amazing. For the sake of time, I won't include the question forms here, but I will put them in the guide for today's video, which you can download down below. And this natural order of acquisition is not just for English-speaking children. Other studies have confirmed the existence of an order of acquisition in other languages as well. So hopefully you are thinking right now, wow, Brittany, this is all super interesting, but how does this apply to me as an adult learning English? Moving on to number 2, learning English as an adult. Well, it turns out there is some research that suggests that there is a natural order of acquisition in adults as well, and that this order of acquisition in adults is similar to the one in children that we just talked about. Researcher Stephen Krashen proposed the natural order hypothesis in 1982. I'm going to show you a summary here of Krashen's 1982 second language grammatical morpheme acquisition sequence. Basically, researchers found that adults learning English produced these morphemes at the top with a higher accuracy than these morphemes at the bottom. This is a little bit complicated, But let's just try to imagine that when we are in school, we tend to learn grammar, for example, from a textbook in a particular order, depending on the authors of that textbook. And then there is the natural order of acquisition, in which Krashen suggests that it doesn't really matter what order we learn these things in. We will mostly be able to use these grammatical points in the same order, no matter what order we learn them in. We'll master the ones at the top first, or be able to use the ones at the top with more accuracy first, and then the next ones, and then the next ones. This is how I interpret this research anyway. Hopefully I'm explaining it well and that it's making sense. If not, let me know in the comments down below. Now, all of this is somewhat controversial, and there have been more studies that have shown that depending on your first language, you may spend more time or less time in one of these particular sequences than somebody who speaks another first language. Okay, let's go to number 3. So the question that I have now, and that maybe you are thinking as well, the question that I think is most important for us as learners and teachers of English is this: how do we move from one stage to the next, from one developmental sequence to the next? How does it work, and how do we master each level? How do we know when we've mastered each level? Is it like a video game? Do we beat one level and then move to the next level? Well, not exactly. The research shows us that you do not perfect something at each stage. We do not completely stop making mistakes at each stage of the sequence. We don't learn the conditionals 1 week, 1 month, and then become absolute experts at using the conditional. Learning languages doesn't work like that. There are many factors that can lead us to making grammar mistakes in areas that we know really well, that we've studied, that we've practiced a lot. Maybe we're tired, maybe we're in a new environment, maybe we're with new people, maybe it's a topic that we're not really familiar with, or maybe we're feeling scared or we're feeling nervous. There are many reasons why people learning English might slip back into a previous sequence, into a previous stage, into a less advanced sequence. That's totally normal. The problem is when we start to feel bad about ourselves, when we start to beat ourselves up for making mistakes that are very basic. It's a very normal part of the process, even for very, very advanced speakers. I know it's frustrating, but it's normal. Actually, moving from one stage to the next looks a lot more like this. At each stage, as you advance, you tend to make better, more sophisticated, more advanced mistakes. And you make simple mistakes less often. It's a question of frequency. So being perfect at each level is a myth. It's just not how language learning works. This is the real measure of progress and of success in English fluency. Perhaps strangely, ironically, the goal at each level should never be perfection. It should never be eliminating your mistakes. The goal at each level should be to make mistakes, to make better mistakes. So what is the point of this video? If you love learning about languages as much as I do, hopefully you just find this topic kind of interesting. But also, what I take from this research is 3 things. 1, it's normal to learn English at different rates, depending on our personalities, depending on our first languages. Some of us will learn certain elements of English more quickly than others or more slowly than others. There's no point in stressing over our progress being too slow because it's just normal. Number 2, you cannot learn English wrong because at least in the early stages, everyone sort of goes through the same kinds of mistakes as everyone else, no matter how you learn English. At least according to the natural acquisition hypothesis. We all have to make these mistakes in order to learn, and even though it can be painful, as the poet Robert Frost said, the best way out is always through. We just have to do it, have to go through the pain. And finally, number 3, the only way that you can maybe study English wrong is to stop studying. It doesn't matter if you're playing video games in English or if you're practicing English with YouTube videos. As long as you are making English words come out of your mouth every day, doing something that you enjoy doing, that's important. You cannot fail. The only conclusion that makes sense is that you will become fluent. You will. The only way you fail at learning English is if you quit. There are some traps and mistakes that can slow you down as you climb the mountain of fluency. So I have made this step-by-step video for you all about how to reach the summit of your English speaking goals. You can watch that by clicking here, and I will see you next time. I'm going to show you a little summary here of Stephen Krashen's. I'm going to wait till the airplane goes by first.